As the sun took a back seat and winter claimed its throne in the northern lands, Scandinavia became a landscape of frost and famine. For us regular folks, winter can be an annoyance, a season that puts our cozy sweaters and hot chocolate to work. But for the Vikings, it was a battle against the elements, a struggle to survive. And yet, somehow, these fierce Norsemen not only made it through the long, dark months, they thrived. Now, let us put ourselves in their sturdy boots and try to navigate a day in the frosty shoes of a Viking. First, let's face the big question. How did they rise with the sun? Well, not technically. You see, when the sun decided to take a vacation, it left darkness in charge for months. Imagine trying to stick to a sleep schedule when night lasts longer than a Netflix binge session. There was no electricity to light their way, so candles or oil lamps took on the role of illuminators. But here's the catch. Fuel was precious and warmth was more important. So lights were dim and reading by lamplight was about as common as finding a four-leaf clover in a blizzard. Sleep schedules went out the window and naps were as frequent as raids. Sure, someone had to keep watch, but that job rotated. No one stayed awake all night because, well, you don't get much done after a few cups of freezing coffee. So how did they spend their daylight hours? If you've ever spent time outdoors in winter, you know there are only so many snowball fights a person can handle. The answer, by the way, is 3. After that, shoveling snow becomes hard labor. So, like most resourceful folks, Vikings turned necessity into entertainment. Games of skill using snow and ice became popular. One such game was Natliker, kind of like a mix between field hockey and hurling, played on frozen ponds or the open fields. It was a full contact sport, though, so imagine the fun when someone smacked you in the face with a frozen piece of wood. Ouch. But what about chores? Keeping a household running in the dead of winter takes a lot of energy. No electricity meant everything was a manual operation. Chop wood, check. Find water that hasn't frozen into a solid block of ice, check. Chase livestock around so they don't freeze themselves. Triple check. All this required teamwork and patience, skills that developed from playing group games. When the weather took a break from being murderous, the community pitched in. They chopped down trees together, hauled the logs to the nearest longhouse, and helped the family prepare for winter. It wasn't uncommon for neighbors to assist those who couldn't manage on their own. In return, the recipient would repay the favor once their own circumstances improved. This system, a form of communal property, ensured that no one faced the harsh winter alone. It was a case of everyone pitching in, which also helped build a strong sense of community. And let's not forget education. Even in winter, Vikings valued learning. While kids were probably eager to play in the snow, their parents understood the importance of keeping their minds active. Education was a community affair. Older kids might help with manual tasks, giving younger ones the space to learn. Reading, writing, and storytelling became their main classroom. Bards would regale young and old with tales of daring adventures and heroic deeds. Stories were more than entertainment. They were a way to pass down history, preserve culture, and teach valuable lessons. Kids listened, they asked questions, and they learned. Storytelling was the original Netflix, except with more meat and fewer commercials. Religion also played a part in daily life. Winter was a time for introspection and spiritual reflection. The harsh conditions served as a reminder of the unpredictability of life, driving home the importance of living right. Religious rituals and ceremonies took place in specially constructed halls or within the longhouses. During the Yuletide season, celebrations included feasts, gift-giving, and the reenactment of the legend of the Yule goat, a large stuffed goat made from straw that was paraded through the village. It was a tradition that combined pagan customs with Christian influences, showing the blending of old beliefs and new during the winter season. Now, the true test of Viking spirit was surviving the winter solstice. This was the longest night of the year, the point when the sun had dipped as low as it would, and the prospect of spring felt like a distant dream. For Vikings, it was a moment of quiet contemplation followed by a burst of celebration. It was a time to acknowledge the challenges they'd faced and the battles they'd won. And boy, did they celebrate. Feasting was a huge part of winter life. They ate hearty meals, drank spiced ale, and exchanged gifts. They knew the importance of lifting each other's spirits during the darkest months. It was a reminder that even in the coldest depths of winter, the spirit of generosity and community could shine through. Let's be honest, the best part of winter for Vikings was Yuletide. Christmas, that magical time of the year when you pretend you like your family. Just kidding, maybe, but seriously, for Vikings, it was more than just a religious holiday. It was a cultural extravaganza. Communities would come together, exchange gifts, tell stories, and most importantly, feast. Animals raised for the occasion would be slaughtered, providing a rich source of protein and fat needed to withstand the winter chill. Leftovers weren't a thing. Every morsel was cherished and nothing was wasted. The spirit of Yule was one of abundance and sharing. It was a time for neighbors and friends to become like family, coming together to celebrate the rebirth of the sun and the promise of spring. But amid the merriment, there was a touch of melancholy. The winter solstice marked the peak of winter's power. From this point on, the days would slowly begin to lengthen, and there was a collective awareness that the grip of winter was slowly loosening. It was a bittersweet feeling, a recognition of both the darkness they had endured and the light that was slowly returning. And let's not forget about their fascination with death. You heard that right. The Vikings were obsessed with the great beyond. And what better time to think about the afterlife than when surrounded by the cold embrace of winter? They believed that when someone died in winter, their soul braved a particularly perilous journey to the afterlife. To help the deceased on their final leg, the Vikings built special burial mounds. They placed the body in a ship-like coffin and buried it with offerings. Sometimes they even held funeral feasts in honor of the dead. Talk about sending off your loved ones in style. But hey, maybe death was on their minds because winter was literally death personified. So maybe don't make plans to hang out with them in the afterlife. But how did their obsession with death affect their everyday lives? Well, they kept busy. Winter was a time for crafting and woodworking. With the onset of cold weather, Vikings would turn to crafts as a way to pass the time and create useful items. They created intricate jewelry from materials like silver and copper, carved wooden objects like combs and bowls, and mended or crafted new tools. They even wove textiles, a skill not typically associated with Vikings. Finally, we come to perhaps the most important aspect of their day, raiding. Viking raids during the winter were like those late-night grocery runs. You really need milk, but you end up with a bag of Doritos and a lottery ticket. But instead of milk, they wanted treasure. And instead of Doritos, they pillaged and plundered. Now, you might think that raiding in the dead of winter was insane, and you wouldn't be wrong. But these guys were hardcore. When the ground froze solid, rivers and lakes became roads. So Vikings would set off on their longships, often targeting monasteries, which usually had more treasure than armed guards. If you've ever wondered why Vikings were called the seafaring barbarians of the 9th to 11th centuries, it's moments like these. Surviving a day in the life of a Viking during winter was a test of endurance, resourcefulness, and community. It was a constant battle against the elements, loneliness, and even boredom. But somehow the Vikings thrived. Their homes, clothing, food, and traditions were all designed to combat the harsh conditions of winter. They gambled, educated their kids, celebrated holidays, honored their dead, and even raided in the snow. They found ways to keep busy, to stay warm, and to stay sane. It makes you wonder, were the Vikings really as uncivilized as history books made them out to be? Or were they just misunderstood survivors who happened to have a taste for pillaging? So now that we've got the longhouse warmed up and the fire crackling, let's talk about the Vikings' best-kept secret weapon in winter survival, the animals. No, they didn't ride polar bears into battle, but they did sleep with their livestock, and not just because they loved a cozy cuddle. These animals were literally living heaters. Sheep, goats, pigs, and even cows were often kept inside the longhouse during the winter months. Not only did this keep the animals alive, but it also raised the temperature in the room. One cow can radiate serious body heat. Add a few goats and a dozen chickens, and suddenly your freezing cabin starts feeling like a Viking sauna. A smelly, noisy, slightly poop-covered sauna, but still warmth is warmth. But even with animals, fire, and furs, winter nights were not easy. There were rules and spoken rituals passed down generations. For example, you never ever let the fire go out. It wasn't just about warmth, it was about luck. Vikings believed that extinguishing your hearth flame during the darkest nights could invite disaster spirits, disease, or worse. So someone, often the youngest or least liked family member, was chosen as the fire watcher. Their job: stay awake, feed the fire, and don't fall asleep. Because if you did, well, the rest of the family might wake up a bit colder than expected, or not at all. And speaking of sleep, let's talk bed hierarchy. In Viking households, not everyone got the same sleeping spot. The elder, the chief, or the parents usually slept closer to the fire, where it was warmest. Kids, servants, and random cousins slept on the outskirts, near the walls where the cold crept in like a nosy ghost. And those stone or wood walls? Yeah, they were cold enough to burn your skin. Viking families learned to sleep tightly packed, layered like a human casserole. But this brings us to a crucial Viking survival technique: sharing warmth. Vikings didn't believe in personal space. Sleeping meant piling up together. Bodies tangled under furs, arms around bellies, feet pressed against someone else's back. There was no romance to it. It was survival. You weren't snuggling for love. You were snuggling for life. And forget pillow talk. You'd be lucky if the guy next to you didn't tea-drool on your forehead while dreaming about herring. Now, outside the longhouse, it was a different world. Blizzards, bone-breaking cold, and pitch-black nights made venturing out deadly. But sometimes it was necessary. Vikings still had to fetch water, check on the animals, or deal with enemies. To brave the outdoors, they used clever tricks. They wrapped their legs in woolen bindings called vindingr, which prevented snow from creeping into their boots, and for footwear, fur-lined boots sealed with animal fat to stay waterproof. Imagine having to butter your shoes every day just to survive. These weren't fashion-forward winter boots. They were handmade, stitched together from scraps of hide and hope. Oh, and let's not forget the hat. Viking hats weren't horned helmets. They were woolen or fur caps, pulled low over the ears, often tied under the chin. If you've ever tried to sleep in freezing cold, you'll know one thing: if your head is cold, your soul is cold. Vikings took that seriously. But physical protection was just half the battle. Mentally, the long winter could crush even the toughest warriors. The psychological toll of endless darkness, isolation, and cold was real. That's why storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was therapy. Each night, someone would recite a saga-long, winding tale of gods, monsters, and legendary ancestors. These weren't bedtime stories. They were life lessons, survival guides wrapped in poetry. By listening, everyone in the longhouse remembered who they were and why they were fighting to stay alive, even the chickens. Some families would even sing low, rhythmic chants that echoed softly in the darkness. The beat matched the crackle of the fire and the slow breathing of sleeping bodies. In a world with no clocks, no phones, and no electric lights, the rhythm of voice and flame became the heartbeat of winter. Now let's zoom out and talk about the community level. In some areas, whole Viking villages worked together to survive. Families would take turns checking on the elderly, preparing shared meals, or repairing snow-covered roofs. These winter months weren't just about individual survival, they were about social survival. Those who isolated themselves didn't last long. Vikings weren't just fierce warriors. They were fierce cooperators when it came to cold weather. And sometimes, they even had winter festivals, yes, in the middle of all that darkness. Think of it as Viking Christmas without the elves. People gathered for feasts, shared fermented drinks, played games, and danced. These moments of joy were like torches in the night, keeping the darkness from winning. So how did the Vikings survive the coldest nights? They stayed close. They shared warmth, food, fire, and stories. They turned survival into ritual and ritual into culture. And through it all, they kept going. Even when the wind howled like 1,000 angry gods and the snow piled high enough to bury a dragon, the Vikings lit another fire, wrapped another fur, and told another story, because giving up? That wasn't very Viking. Okay, so the Vikings had fire, furs, and cows in their bedrooms. That explains how they survived winter, but what about when things went wrong? Oh friend, things went wrong. A lot. Let's start with the obvious enemy: illness. When you pack a dozen people, a handful of animals, and zero ventilation into a smoke-filled wooden house for 6 months, you're not creating a wellness retreat, you're brewing a bacterial party. Coughs became concerts. Fevers burned higher than the fire pit. And because nobody had invented cough syrup or vitamin C yet, even a common cold could turn deadly. One of the biggest winter threats? Lung rot, what we'd now call pneumonia or severe respiratory infections. The constant smoke from the hearth wasn't just annoying, it damaged lungs. Imagine trying to sleep with a hacking cough, wrapped in furs while a goat sneezes on your foot. That was normal. And with no real doctors, Viking medicine was a grab bag of herbal remedies, charms, and wild guesses. Someone coughing up blood? That might call for a poultice made of moss, animal fat, and prayers to Thor. Did it work? Sometimes. Did it smell? Absolutely. Then there were parasites, the unwanted winter roommates. The warm, cramped longhouse was a paradise for fleas, lice, and yes, bedbugs. Vikings bathed occasionally, but in the dead of winter, stripping down for a cold wash was basically suicide. So hygiene took a bit of a vacation. Hair was rarely cut, clothes were rarely washed, and bedding was, well, let's just say it developed its own ecosystem. Some warriors even had to shave parts of their heads to control lice infestations, Viking helmets. Less about protection, more about hiding the itch. But that's not all. Let's talk latrines, indoor plumbing. Nope. When nature called during a snowstorm, you had two choices. 1, brave the freezing dark to reach the outhouse, or 2, use a chamber pot. Spoiler, most people chose door number 2. That pot was emptied eventually, but sometimes not until it got full or froze, which meant winter in a longhouse came with the ever-present smell of smoke, sweat, animals, and... yeah, you get the idea. There's a reason Viking candles were strongly scented. Still, the Vikings weren't hopeless cavemen. They used birch bark as a kind of ancient soap, ashes as disinfectant, and snow as the world's coldest bath. They even had toothpicks made from animal bones because even when you're freezing, nobody wants roast mutton stuck in their teeth. Now, let's go outside briefly. Even when the temperature dropped so low that your breath froze in midair, some Vikings had to venture out, to hunt, to patrol, to make sure a rival clan wasn't sneaking up with torches and bad intentions. And this led to another winter problem, frostbite. They didn't know the word, but they knew the feeling when your fingers turned white. Your nose stopped hurting and suddenly you couldn't move your toes. To deal with it, they used grease smearing animal fat on exposed skin. It helped block wind and cold. Kind of like medieval Vaseline, but with more scent of goat. And if a limb got too cold, well, sometimes things had to be cut off. Fingers, toes, ears. That's when you knew winter had won. But not every danger came from the weather. Vikings had enemies, sometimes other Vikings. And winter was a perfect time for surprise raids. Your neighbors might be starving, desperate, or just plain greedy. So part of surviving the coldest nights meant staying armed. Even in your furs, axes hung by the door. Swords slept next to their owners. Viking warriors didn't go to bed unprepared. Because if a rival clan kicked your door in at midnight, you had about 3 seconds to go from sleepy to stabby. And speaking of sleep, let's not forget the weirdest danger of all, dreams. Some Viking sagas mention night spirits, beings that crept into your longhouse while you slept. They whispered in ears, sat on chests, and left sleepers gasping for breath. Sound familiar? Modern historians think this could have been sleep paralysis or night terrors, but back then, it was blamed on trolls, witches, or even angry ancestors. Some people wore iron charms to bed, others muttered spells. And everyone avoided sleeping with their head facing north, because that was the direction of the dead. So even in rest, the Vikings stayed alert, and yet, they endured, they kept the fire burning. They laughed through coughs, scratched through lice, and prayed through fevers. They told stories of heroes, of frost giants slain and winters outlasted. They played bone games, carved runes, and even fell in love because if you're stuck indoors for 5 months, someone's getting a Viking cuddle. That's how they survived, with stubbornness, resourcefulness, and just enough madness to laugh at the cold. Now, after watching this, you might be wondering, great, but what does this mean for me? Well, friend, whether you're braving the winter chill or just trying to get through a long, dark season of life, remember the Vikings. Remember their resilience, their resourcefulness, and their camaraderie around the fire. And hey, maybe don't worry so much about the small stuff like a little cough or a nose that won't stop running. After all, it could be worse. You could be sleeping with a goat that's sneezing on your foot. Okay, that's probably something to worry about. You need to know this guy's story. He lived through World War II, saw Hitler come and go, and he has a message for you. Click here to learn how he cheated death and discovered the secret to an epic life. The sun dips low, casting long shadows over a frozen landscape. Crisp air bites at exposed skin, and the first snowflakes of winter begin to fall. For those born in warmer climes, this might be a picturesque scene. But for the Vikings, this was a prelude to a nightly battle against the elements, a fight for warmth, food, and life itself. Winter in Scandinavia was a relentless test, a struggle that pushed the limits of human endurance. The Vikings didn't just survive these harsh conditions. They thrived, adapting and innovating to conquer the coldest nights. How did they do it? What secrets did they hold that allowed them to not only endure but flourish in the face of such adversity? Join us as we unravel the Viking Winter Survival Guide, where each tip is a testament to their resilience, ingenuity, and perhaps a little bit of magic. Let's kick off our guide with the basics, because without these, there'd be no guide to follow. First up, shelter. The Viking Age lasted from around the 8th to the 11th century, covering parts of what we now call Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. And let me tell you, these guys were spread out over some seriously chilly real estate. Their homes were key. There were a few styles, but the longhouse was the big daddy. Think of a massive living, dining, sleeping hall all in one. These beauties could stretch over 100 feet and house an entire clan, including livestock. No, seriously, cows, pigs, sheep, goats, chickens, they all lived under the same roof. Can you imagine your morning commute? Just dodging a few goats on the way to work, but these houses weren't just cozy dens. They were designed to survive the winter. Walls were thick, roofs were steep, and many had double doors to block the wind. As for windows, well, forget about heating and cooling bills. They didn't have any. Instead, they relied on light and ventilation. Just hope your neighbors weren't having a midnight pig roast. Speaking of ventilation, they had a pretty genius system. You see, fire was essential not just for warmth, but to cook and purify water, and they didn't want smoke filling up their home. So they installed vents high on the walls, sucking the smoke out and keeping the place smelling fresh. Well, as fresh as a goat-filled longhouse could be? Okay, second on the list, food. Without enough sustenance, you won't last long in the cold. Hunting and fishing were staples, but when the frozen lakes and rivers made that tough, they turned to what they grew. Barley, oats, and wheat were the grains of choice, plus vegetables like cabbage, onions, and carrots. And don't forget, meat was king. Think of roasted boar, venison, and salted fish. Berries, fruits, and nuts were also essential, providing natural sugars and fats to help the body cope with the cold. The Vikings took their food seriously. They cured meats, dried fish, pickled vegetables, and even fermented stuff like beer and cider. They stored these goodies in root cellars, underground chambers dug into the side of hills. These natural refrigerators were insulated, keeping food fresh for months. Plus, think of it as a Viking wine cellar, except instead of fancy wines, they had beer and blood sausage. Don't knock it till you try it. Now let's talk about clothing. After shelter and food, what's more important? This wasn't a one-size-fits-all situation. The weather varied, so did the job. A coastal fisherman needed different gear than a mountain hunter. But there were some must-haves. Layers were key. Start with a linen shirt, then add wool trousers and a heavy woolen cloak. And don't forget the headgear. A good hat kept the cold air from seeping in and the ears toasty. And here's a bonus tip: learn to tailor. Being able to fix and alter your clothes was a lifesaver. And finally, footwear. Sturdy leather boots lined with fur kept their toes warm and dry. Next up, community. Humans are social creatures. We didn't evolve to survive alone. And the Vikings knew this. Family and community ties were super strong. They relied on each other for everything from building a house to defending against enemies. And in winter, when the nights were long and the work was hard, this support meant the difference between life and death. Shared tasks, shared meals, and stories helped them make it through the darkest months. So if you're feeling a bit isolated right now, remember the Vikings. It might be tough to survive winter alone, but together, that's a different story. Okay, let's talk about something a bit taboo, but super important: sanitation. When you're cramped inside with limited access to clean water, things can get pretty gross. But the Vikings had some surprisingly modern ideas. They believed in keeping things clean. Regular baths were the norm, often in communal bathhouses heated by, you guessed it, fire. The heat warmed the body, opened the pores, and helped release sweat, dirt, and dead skin. And don't forget, it was also a social event, a chance to catch up with your neighbors while scrubbing up. And for the personal stuff, they used a sponge on a stick. Seriously, it's like they read my mind. I mean, who doesn't love a good sponge bath? Next up, exercise. Sitting around all day in a drafty house isn't great for the body or the mind. But the Vikings found ways to stay active. Wrestling, a popular pastime, was a full-body workout that also tested strength and skill. Then there were outdoor games, running, jumping, and playing with sleds and skis. Staying physically active helped keep their bodies warm, boosted their mood, and reminded them that life wasn't all darkness and cold. It was also a way to pass the time. Long, dark nights needed entertainment, and they had plenty. Drinking games, storytelling, and singing were favorites. Plus, there was always mischief to be had, pranks and jokes to lighten the mood. Laughter, after all, is the best medicine for a case of cabin fever. And finally, health. Winter blues got you down. Try a spot of yoga. It might sound odd, but staying mentally sharp was crucial. Puzzles, riddles, and word games kept their minds engaged, and it helped pass the countless hours indoors. Then there was the art of rune reading. Each letter of the runic alphabet had a secret meaning, and some believed they could reveal the future or offer guidance. Basically, it was like Vikings getting a daily horoscope, except with more beards involved. And there you have it, the Viking survival guide to conquering winter. They didn't just brave the cold, they thrived in it. From their sturdy homes to their clever games, they turned potential hardships into community events. Their approach reminds us that challenges are meant to be overcome and that a little creativity can go a long way. So the next time winter tries to slow you down, remember the Vikings and their spirit of resilience. After all, as they say, it's not the cold that kills you, it's the lack of plan. Stay warm, stay creative, and never underestimate the power of a good story and a roaring fire. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the Viking winter. Did you learn anything new? Any tips you'll be trying this season? Share your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more historical adventures. Until next time, stay warm and keep exploring. Let me set the scene for you. The year is 860 AD and you are shivering in your woolen tunic as you make your way through the snowdrifts of a Scandinavian village. Winter has been harsh this year, so harsh that the frozen ground refuses to yield even to the sharpest of plows. As you pass by the longhouses, you can see wisps of smoke curling through the gaps in their thatched roofs, providing a faint glimmer of hope amidst the icy wasteland. The villagers huddle around their fires, sharing tales of the relentless cold, of blizzards that howl like hungry wolves, and of frozen fingers that refuse to thaw. Yet there is a quiet determination in their eyes, a refusal to let the bitter cold extinguish their spirits. They have endured such winters before, and they will survive this one too. But why? Why do humans keep enduring the never-ending night? Why does winter keep returning? Let us find out the secret of winter in this video. Now, let's head back to our frigid Scandinavian village, but shift the timeline forward a few weeks. You can feel the tension easing from the villagers' shoulders. The sun, though still weak, seems to linger in the sky a little longer each day. The days aren't filled with the oppressive gloom of winter, but they aren't quite the joyous celebrations of summer either. It is the time of the second season, spring, a time of anticipation and renewal. The people go about their daily lives with a renewed sense of purpose. The children's laughter echoes through the village once more. The men set off into the forest to hunt, and the women gather herbs and tend to their small livestock. Despite the lingering chill in the air, there is a palpable excitement in the village. The threat of winter's bite has lessened, but the memories of its ferocity are still fresh. Each villager knows that the cycle of seasons will turn again, and with it, the promise of another brutal winter. But for now, they bask in the glory of spring, knowing that they have survived the coldest nights once more. What makes them do this every year? We may never truly know. We haven't yet started the video properly until we have a lovely dramatic intro. Humans have endured winters since forever, it seems. The oldest records we have tell us about how the ancient Romans struggled through the Roman winter of 09 AD, the year without summer, which was so bad that an entire section of the Egyptian army stationed in Judea froze to death. From the Inuits who built igloos to withstand the frozen north to the Bedouins who navigated scorching deserts without water, humans have always found ways to adapt and survive. But what is it that drives them to endure these extreme conditions year after year? Is it the thrill of the challenge, the need for survival, or something else entirely? What forces drive these humans to keep going? For our story today, we'll focus on the Vikings, the legendary seafarers who lived in Scandinavia from the 8th to the 11th century. More specifically, we'll look at how these fierce warriors coped with the harsh winters in their homeland. Imagine standing in the frozen wastelands of 9th century Scandinavia. The biting wind whips across your face, carrying with it the promise of more snow and more ice. You pull your heavy cloak tighter around you and gaze at the gray sky. The sun is barely a distant memory, and the days are short and filled with biting cold. But despite the hardship, life goes on. The villagers tend to their meager crops, hunt for food, and tell stories around their fires to keep the darkness at bay. For the Vikings, winter was not just a season, it was a test of endurance, a battle against the elements. It was a time when the land turned hostile, forcing them to rely on their skills and determination to survive. But they didn't just endure the winter, they thrived in it. The Vikings developed ingenious ways to cope with the harsh conditions. They built sturdy houses from wood and turf that could withstand the worst of the blizzards. They developed warm clothing from animal skins that kept the cold at bay. And they kept busy with indoor activities like storytelling, board games, and crafts. The long, dark nights were filled with the sound of laughter, music, and conversation, creating a sense of community and togetherness. And when the sun finally returned, the Vikings emerged from their homes ready to face the world with renewed vigor. In the heart of this snowy landscape lived a young Viking named Ragnar. Unlike many of his peers, Ragnar found solace in the winter. He loved the crunch of snow under his boots, the sting of the wind on his face, and the beauty of the snow-covered trees. While others complained about the cold, he saw it as an opportunity to test his limits. One particularly harsh winter, when the temperature plummeted and the snow piled high, Ragnar decided to venture out alone into the blizzard. He wanted to see how long he could survive in the heart of the storm. With a thick cloak, a warm hat, and a determined spirit, Ragnar stepped into the swirling snow. The wind howled around him, but he kept walking deeper and deeper into the heart of the blizzard. As the hours passed, the temperature dropped and the snow swirled faster, but Ragnar refused to turn back. Finally, when his body began to ache and his vision started to blur, he knew he had reached his limit. With a deep breath, he turned around and started his journey back to the village. As he walked, he realized that he had survived one of the harshest blizzards in living memory. When he finally reached the village and stepped inside a warm longhouse, he was greeted with cheers and celebration. The villagers had feared for his safety and were overjoyed to see him return alive. That day, Ragnar became a local hero, known throughout the village for his bravery and resilience. And so it went, generation after generation. The Vikings adapted and thrived in the face of adversity, finding strength in their community and courage in their hearts. They understood that winter was not just a season, it was a challenge, a test of their resilience and a reminder of their strength. And as long as they had each other, they knew they could face any storm that came their way. So what is it about winter that keeps humans coming back for more? Perhaps it is the thrill of the challenge, the satisfaction of conquering nature's fury, or the bond it creates between people. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear. Humans are a resilient species, and winter is just another obstacle in our never-ending journey for survival. Now, my inquisitive friend, I want to turn the tables on you. What is it about winter that fascinates you the most? Or perhaps you have a heartwarming winter tradition you'd like to share. Leave a comment below and let's have a chat. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button, because who knows? You might just learn something new and interesting. And who doesn't love that, right? Speaking of that, did you know that there is a fascinating video on the secrets of the pyramids just waiting for you to watch it? Click here to start your journey, and don't forget to hit that like button. Your support means everything to us. So thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and never stop asking questions. The answers might just surprise you.